Good morning, everybody on here, and I am going to come to you with some juicy tidbits because in last night's study session that we did for the Code Journey, we really opened up some incredibly huge pieces. And if you haven't been a part of those study journey sessions, I do encourage you to go ahead and just register for them. There's not much to them. You're not going to get a whole bunch of email stuff or anything like that, but you do get to go back and access the recordings if you can't attend them live. And we can get into some pretty great pieces of information during that time where we unfold the deeper layers of the codes. And I'm wearing glasses this morning because I actually have a few little notes that I want to work from today because I don't want to forget what I'm going to get into in this video today. And it's going to be really huge because a lot of what we're dealing with in the codes right now has to do with clearing out and cleansing out and releasing the difficulties and the adversities that we've been dealing with. And I'm sure right there that probably got a few people's attention because myself included, we're all dealing with pretty much some challenges right now in one form or another. For some people that's a physical challenge, for some people that's a financial challenge, for some people that's relationship challenges, it might be all of the above. There's all kinds of different ways that these things show up into our lives. So I wanted to unfold some of this from a code perspective because a really huge piece right now of working with the codes between now and May, and one of the big overlapping pieces has to do with balance. And that balance piece is so incredibly huge. It's just a piece that is so easy for us to slip out of. It's so easy for us to get imbalanced in this physical third world dimension. And so in that process, so much can be shaken up in our lives, and that's where we start to experience these adversities and these difficulties and these challenges, and so it's a big piece for us to grasp, and we have a big opportunity. And as we were talking about in the study session last night, things don't necessarily come up to destroy us, but they come up to help us be aware. They come up to help us pay attention to things in our life, because oftentimes we get wrapped up in this material world and we're really not paying attention is what it comes down to. I mean, that's been a big theme I've seen where a lot of turbulence has gotten created in different situations. When I go through and evaluate, and I was just talking to some other people about this week, people that aren't necessarily following the code work, but they can relate to things going awry. They can relate to wanting to fix things or to get things back on course, so to say, get things back into that alignment. And it comes from not paying attention. It's just a big piece in there. So I want to unfold some of the code pieces of balance and imbalance and harmonizing and alignment, because these are terms that we're using a whole lot in our life. They're terms that constantly are coming through. And I want to also I'm going to look at some of the pieces that come up, or the things that come up when we're out of balance or we're in an imbalance in our life. And this is a great time for this to be done because we're unfolding so much wisdom in ourselves right now. And we are in this time where we have the opportunity to make breakthroughs. Now, those of you that follow astrology, you'll realize that we have 3 planets going retrograde. And for people that operate in fear, that could create a lot of fear. But the retrogrades are such a great opportunity for us to make breakthroughs. And I think that's a piece that we oftentimes miss. It's a natural piece of balancing action and helping us to be in more abundant states. So these retrograde periods, we have to release. It's a constant exchange, a constant sort of transformation that's happening in our lives. So let's get going here with this, and let's look at balance, for example. What is balance about? And balance in life through the perspective of codes is about honoring our soul processes in this world. Okay, so think about that for a minute, because so much of what we do for earthly means, right? We do it for an income, we do it for comfort, we do it for something that is physical in our life. And that is most of it, including even sleep, right? Because our souls don't need to sleep, but our bodies need to sleep. So balance is really about bringing in the spiritual side of life. It's really about honoring the spiritual pieces that are happening in our life or our existence here in this time. It is about taking time for our soulful self as much, or at least even some, as our human self, because we give a whole lot to our human self. We do a whole lot of human things, but not a lot of spiritual things. Now, there are certainly those gurus out there that spend more time in the spiritual processes than they do in the physical processes. And so what we're trying to do, and the average person, I would say, here, who is having to work for an income, who is maybe not even finding their passion, they're just kind of going through life, so to say, not really thinking about a whole lot, that balance becomes really important. Children understand this, and we give it to children, which is part of why we can be more excited around them. It's part of why they have the energy that they have, because they're getting time to go out and just play during their day. It's not learning for 8 hours a day like adults who go to work for 8 hours a day. We've gotten so out of balance as adults, and I think that is part of our challenges as adults, is because we're living out of balance. We're not living with the same balanced lifestyle that, say, even a child has, right? A baby is out of balance in a different way because they have to be completely taken care of. A child is living in balance, which was why it is such an incredible time and why we often have fond childhood memories. Not everybody has that, but it's oftentimes why it's such a huge part of our life, because we do get that play a lot of times. We do get that break between what we're doing. We're not just in this constant work, do mode. So that balance becomes really important, because without creating that, without honoring both sides of ourselves, without honoring additional pieces to ourselves, we get very weighted down and very heavy, and that's what life feels like, oftentimes out of balance. Now, when we harmonize, and there's two different aspects to harmonize and harmonizing. They're actually run on two different code patterns. So when we harmonize, we're actually working from within. We've gone deep within ourselves. We have connected with our energy of being practical and responsible, but we're self-functioning. So to harmonize is to be self-functioning. And then when we get into harmonizing, which is living in the action of harmonize, the harmonizing is actually an integrative relationship between all aspects of ourselves in all dimensions, in all times, in all places. That's a pretty powerful piece. This is why harmonizing becomes so important, whether we're doing it in our physical world or whether we're doing it in other aspects of ourselves. Harmonizing is really about integrating and bringing together all these different components in our life. Harmonizing is working with our own personal team, whether that is our team of angels, whether that is us, and really they're kind of one and the same if we want to get down to the really deep layers of those existences. And it's about bringing together all those different components of ourselves. When we are harmonizing in our outer world, we are working with people of all different types and personalities and backgrounds and walks of life and preferences and belief systems. And we're able to come together and integrate in a way that brings valuable experiences for all of us. We're bringing out the best aspects. And I don't mean that in a hierarchical sort of way when I say best, but we're bringing out those aspects that create favorable experiences for us, that create experiences of joy and happiness, and which bring things into balance. So the harmonizing creates that balance naturally. Now, alignment is a whole different piece, because alignment is almost like being totally in the soul process in some ways. It's an isolation. It's not an integration, but it is removing oneself from the other aspects in order to find a soul connection. So that soul connection then allows us to start to do the harmonizing. So sometimes we have to jump from one extreme to another extreme in order to come into that centered space. And when we are centered, and I want to focus in on that for a minute. When we are centered, what we're doing is we're removing the competition. And I believe I talked about that a couple of months ago, just in the last 2 to 3 months, about things, that piece of being centered and centering in there. We are in a process of learning how to not compete, but to create relationship. And so when we align, what we're doing is we're learning how to stand in the soul self among material world upheavals and among the material world. It is a point of stillness when we align with something. It creates a peace and a calmness among what challenges us, among the difficulties, among the adversities. So we know that we are holding or being aligned when we can find the peace, when we know how to be still, when we know how to provide that balance. And that's what it does. When we align, we provide a balance to the material world. And that's important because we're living in the material world. So it's going to be almost impossible to bring in too much soulfulness to a material world, because you're dealing with physical pieces all the time. So in order to have favorable experiences, in order to remove the adversities and the difficulties, it's about coming into relationship with them. It's about doing it. If you think about even the natural environment, if they are competing with each other, they're having harsh experiences. If animals compete with each other, they're having hard experiences. And they're constantly getting picked on and beat up and things like this. And when they come into a relationship, they're having fun, they're in play, they're enjoying each other. In nature, it doesn't stand by and say, hey, you're picking on me. In nature, they find a way to work with each other. The animals find a way to work with each other in the natural environment. So they actually show us that natural way. So let's get back now to what imbalance is about. And imbalance is a huge way. It's about teaching us through adversity. So our adversities and our difficulties are really a way of learning, but it's also a huge sign to say, hey, you're out of balance. Wake up. Pay attention to what's going on here. You've gotten off track. You've set aside pieces of yourself that are needed. Okay? So it's like if we operate only in the human mind, we're missing out on the whole intuitive piece that allows us a certain timing, a certain flow with things that works. If we are only operating in the soulful self, we place ourselves and others in a lot of danger by not honoring the way this world works. This world doesn't necessarily work the same as the soul world, but they can integrate and they can work together in a way that is harmonizing, which creates a wholeness instead of being so separate, instead of having to bear the burden all on one side or the other. Because that's not necessary. And when we look at the truth and we look at the wholeness, harmonizing is what the wholeness is all about. And harmonizing is where we get into where I come from and the multiverse and the Magi team, which is it's not just a unifying aspect, it's not just a oneness. And the oneness is really, really important to our existence right now. But it is honoring all of the different aspects and components that make up the one. It's bringing them together in a way that is flowing and is working together instead of against each other. So when we look at that, let's look at some of the pieces that come up from imbalance. Some of the way that those, what we would refer to as harsh, challenging trials, tribulations, show up in our life. And the way that they often show up, and these are key components, and I pulled this because part of the codes right now is to take a look at repeating patterns in our life. And I have a feeling some of you can relate to this. So I know I sat down and I was looking at what are some of the repeating patterns, especially like I have one area in my life that continues to challenge me. It continues to come up with repeating patterns in my life. And those repeating patterns come down to a few key things: competition, jealousy, lies, manipulation, deception, sabotage, and blaming. So these are all key things that I came up with that are part of my life, and I bet a whole bunch of hands just went up right there and went, me too, me too. I'm doing those things too. I've got those pieces in my life, and I don't think I'm consciously creating them, but they're there. And whether we are consciously creating them or not, whether we are aware that we are creating them or not, somehow and for some reason they're showing up in their life. And why are they showing up in our life? Because we're imbalanced. We're paying too much attention to the material world. We're paying too much attention to what is outside of ourselves. So let's take a look at the code aspects of some of these individual pieces here. Now, competition is really interesting because competition is a dynamic of actually, in many ways, can be too much living in our soul self. It's isolating ourselves too much. So competition starts to happen in our life to engage us in the outer world. We become too much of a recluse. We've pulled back too much. People are needing interaction with us. They are requesting, in what feels like a harsh way, our attention. They're needing in themselves what we have. So let's say that somebody is living very materially, but they don't have really any of that spiritual component there. They're not operating with the universal principles, say, of integrity or honesty or transparency or these different things. But maybe you're operating very much in that way. And it could be the roles are switched here. I'm just, there's two different pieces here. And so when we might be operating very much in that soulful space and we might be withdrawing and pulling back too much from people, it creates a competition because there's fear patterns that will show up for them of not having that. They're realizing, I don't have something that you have. So I'm going to compete with you. I'm going to poke and I'm going to prod you until you engage with me because I need to learn from you somehow. I have become isolated and I'm disconnected from my abundance energy. This is what competition, people that are in a competition space that provoke competition are doing. They are removed from that spiritual world, or they're isolating themselves in some way. So the competition pattern really shows that the spiritual has become isolated from the material world. And so if the material world can provoke the spiritual to some sort of anger or turbulence or something like that, it is in an essence bringing that spiritual into the material world. It doesn't realize that it loses some of that spiritual component. So if we can be aware when competition shows up to realize that where the competition is coming from is in need of attention from the soul self. Now, of course, we cannot force somebody to engage their soul self, because what they're really needing in order to stop being competitive is to engage their own soul self, not from outside of themselves. But it's a great way for us to show that we're being imbalanced in some ways. So the competition pattern makes us want to realize that we're being too much of a recluse. We need to engage more with people. Now, the jealousy pattern that tends to come up, and I've had a lot of competition and jealousy, and a lot of times they go hand in hand with each other. The jealousy pattern comes when we are living in abundance. And you might think to yourself, yeah, but I have absolutely nothing. Why are people jealous of me? I don't have money. I don't have these things. Why or how could they still be jealous of me? And this is a great thing, because when Jessie was touring the U.S., and life crashed out for her over in the material aspects when Orly passed. And one of the things that happened was she had a lot of competition that went on in her family dynamics. There was a lot of aspects, particularly with her sister, where there was a lot of competition, energy patterns that were going on. And those competition patterns, it was very interesting. When she crashed out and she was in this devastation, and she landed in Sioux Falls, and by that time her mother had passed as winter came on that first year in Sioux Falls. And she was living in her vehicle in minus 30, minus 40 degree temps. And I'm still floored by that, because because it really, she was living so outside of material boundaries in order to do that. And her sister was still jealous of her at that point. She was trying to share the love. She had set things aside. She had let so many things go. She was not living in that competition with her sister from her side. And yet the sister was still jealous of her. And here's the interesting piece, because even in that aspect of challenging circumstances, she was living in such a state of abundance, such a state of wealth, such a state of gratitude for what she had. And she worked so well with the resources that she was creating and producing this abundance energy. And that abundance energy is what leads people to oftentimes become jealous. Jealousy is founded in there. So jealousy actually, in many ways, can be an affirmation that we are living in abundance. And the people that are jealous over us or with us, they have not found that abundance. So again, we have these polarity aspects of where they are lacking, so they become jealous of something that we have, even when we have nothing. Really think about that. That's a really interesting piece to understand when these dynamics come up and when somebody is acting this way. And again, we can show them that this exists in them. We can remind them that it exists, and that's part of why we are in that state, is to help them remember that. But again, the bigger piece is that we can't remove these things for them. So we have to learn to find our own balance among them in the process of this, because if they're being jealous, they have to find that abundance within them. What we can do is make suggestions of things that they might try in their life. But if they're wrapped up so much in their lack, it may still be very hard for them to embrace those things. But all we can do is bring it up. We can share with them the things that we do to keep ourselves in that space. And at some point it does take heed, and even when we think it's not clicking for them and they're not utilizing it, it may just be that it's getting stored away as a resource for the future for them. So that's a really important piece to keep in mind. Manipulation. Manipulation is another really interesting piece that happens, because manipulation is centered around positive relationships. It is centered around love. And so when somebody is operating from love and they are in favorable relationship, oftentimes with themselves first, right? Because we have to be in favorable relationship with ourselves because before we come into favorable relationship with other people. So that manipulation piece starts to show up where people are not in relationship. They do not have loving relationship with themselves, and they do not function in loving relationships. So when you see manipulation coming up, it's an imbalance to realize that we are holding people in our lives that are not functioning in loving relationship. They don't have that in themselves. So we need to make the shifts and the adjustments to be around people who are in loving relationship with themselves. Or it's a reminder to us to say, maybe we're not operating in loving relationship with our own self, and we need to stop and explore, where are we not operating in loving relationship to ourselves or with others? And that's an important piece. So, again, these pieces go hand in hand. So the manipulation comes up because somebody may, and it may not be that we're not necessarily doing that. It's that they may be unable to receive it as well. But we want to look at somewhere there's a piece where we are not operating in loving relationship. Now, loving relationship doesn't mean that we are complying to what somebody else wants us to be. It means that we are acting in loving ways to them. We are acting in ways that are inclusive, even if we don't hang out with them. We are acting in ways that are respectful to them. And this can be a really challenging piece. And I have to admit, I even have my points in this earthly realm, in this human existence, that operating in favorable relationship can be very, very challenging. And it's a piece that I'm working on because we don't have these types of aspects that go on in the multiverse. We don't function. There's all the different aspects, but we don't function in these manipulative ways. These are these more what people would term negative or challenging ways show up because of the third dimensional energy, the heaviness, the distortion. It's a distortion of the pure energy, which is about relationship. So that's a big piece. Deception. Deception comes up to remind us that we need to bring greater balance in the mentoring aspects. We need to have a better balance in listening and talking. We need to have a better balance between learning and teaching. And there's an interesting piece that we unfolded in last night's study session, which was about being our own mentor. And how much are we mentoring ourselves and how much are we mentoring others? Are we coming off too bossy to other people? Are we coming off as too much of a know-it-all? Maybe we need to stop and see what we can learn from that person, because even what appears as the harshest, most ugliest situation to us has something to teach us. So if we're willing to step back and get an observation and say, what are you willing to teach us? Where can we learn from each other? Where can my human self learn from my soul self and my soul self learn from my human self? And, this can be by saying, sit down and shut up to your human self. It can be by saying, or coming into aspect of the human self saying, let me show you what I know, because I have a valuable piece. So somewhere we're not honoring a valuable piece where there's deception. So deception comes up because we really are living in a lie. We're not living in the patterns that are creating success for ourselves. We're not really truly open to success. We're too set in our own ways, or somebody is too set in their own ways. They're choosing to live in lies instead of truths. And so when we see that deception coming up, we know that there are lies present, and we need to stop and check in and go, are those lies within ourselves, or is somebody else living in a lie? We don't need to hate them because they're living in lies, and we don't have to totally reject them because they're living in lies. But we need to be aware of it so that we don't allow ourselves to get caught up in their lies. And again, coming back to continuing to bring truth into things. It's an opportunity for the truth to come out. Manipulation is an opportunity to be in right, loving relationship. Deception is an opportunity for the truth to come out. Jealousy is an opportunity for us to be in abundance. So you see where I'm going with these things? Lies are about our victim spaces. They're about somebody in the situation feeling like a victim, or some piece of ourself feeling like a victim, because it is afraid of all these big changes maybe that our soul self is making, and it hasn't registered or been included in the decision-making process in some ways. I know that Jessie dealt with a lot of victim patterns where she was not included in family decisions throughout her life. And that placed her in this position of people having control and being controlling over her and drawing very controlling people into her life. And so the lie piece is realizing there's a lack of inclusion going on. So the people that are being controlling are living in these lies, and they're unwilling to include the truth. They're unwilling to include the light. They're excluding a piece of something so that they can continue to manipulate and have control of a situation or of people or of things like that. So lies become also an opportunity for the truth to come out. It becomes a platform for the victim to step out of being the victim and to voice their opinion. Sabotage is the next big thing, and I've been dealing a lot with some sabotage patterns in my life lately. And the important thing, why do we want to become aware of these things? Because we want to bring closure to these patterns right now in our life. It doesn't mean that we are excluding the true energy or kicking the true energy out of our life, but we're bringing closure to the distorted versions, the lie pieces of these patterns. And so sabotage, again, is about not living in the soul self, not giving enough time to the soul self. Or again, it can be that too much in the soul self aspect. And so sabotage is coming in, coming in from people who are not spending enough time in their soul self. And they see you as that person that is very much in their soul self. So, in an odd set of ways, a lot of these challenging adversity experiences that we deal with are really affirmations, possibly, in ways of how we are living, or at least how other people are perceiving that we are living, because they're living in this hierarchical structure. When people are very much in the third dimensional energy, they're living in a hierarchical structure that says you're better than me. You're living in a way that I want to live, and I don't know how to find that in myself, or I'm unwilling to embrace that in myself right now. So the sabotage pattern comes up from somebody who is very much excluding their soul self at that point. It comes up from those people who have become very detached from their soul self, and that they have very hard lessons. They're feeling very stuck in their life. They and as we know, right, when something feels stuck or stagnant, it starts to become disruptive, right? Like a child who feels like it can't do something, it can't go out and play or things like that, and so it starts to create trouble so that it can go do something else just to shift the energy. That's really what sabotage energy is about. Again, it doesn't have to be deliberate or personal to you. It just is really about somebody who's in this stuck space, and they've got a lesson that they need to learn before they can move on, and they haven't learned that lesson yet, and they think you might be a key to teaching them that lesson. So some really big things. Blaming is a next big thing. Now, again, this was another huge pattern between Jessie and her sister, but it's also a pattern because I've stepped into the human body, and the human body holds the resonance of the patterns that Jessie had dealt with in her life. And so I'm here clearing out a lot of these patterns, cleaning them up, if you want to say, bringing them into truth. And it's something that I still deal with of this blaming aspect in life. And so the blaming piece is very interesting, because the blaming piece shows up when we are being successful at something and we're getting recognition for that success. So let's say I'm in one work environment and blaming is showing up, but in other environments of my life, I'm being very successful, and I may not be necessarily super successful in that work environment where it's showing up, but I'm being really successful in other areas. It doesn't matter if my success is not in that specific area where the pattern is showing up, because I am exuding still a success energy there and a recognition. So I might be getting recognized and being very successful in my code work, but in this other work environment, I am getting this blaming energy showing up, people wanting to blame me for things. And I may or may not have done those things. That's not even the point. It's the point is the type of pattern that's showing up. So what they are seeing, and oftentimes it will be in the same environment, I'll recognize that. Their perception is that I am so successful that I am getting recognized for things, and they're seeing me get attention. And this plays hand in hand with the jealousy piece in things. And so here again, they're seeing a loving relationship between me and somebody else because that person maybe is giving me recognition, and they're wanting recognition and they're not getting it. And why are they not getting it? Well, because they're living in these lies and these distortions and all of these other pieces, and they're trying to compete, and they're doing all these things that is drawing negative attention to them instead of positive attention to them. So these are really key pieces, and I wanted to share these with you today because, well, we have big openings. If you haven't noticed right now, this is a time of big openings, and it is a time to clear this stuff up. It is a time, and I guess I shouldn't say clear it out as much as clear it up, because it's not about totally getting rid of it, because it's about transforming what the code pattern or the key core of the energy is. It's getting into the truth and the core of the energy instead of being in the lies. So what we're clearing out is the lies, and what we are doing is cleaning it up so that we can get to the favorable parts and the enjoyable parts of these aspects, which then bring everything back into balance. Because when we're in truth, it's not a right or a wrong or a this or that. It is balance. Truth is about holding and honoring and harmonizing. And I think harmonizing is the really big key piece, because that is where we can operate independently, putting forth our own plans, our own ideas. We are able to be self-supportive. We are self-sufficient. And we are self-sufficient because we have included all of these different aspects and come into favorable relationship in every way with every aspect and every piece of ourself. It doesn't mean that we are 100% free of challenges or difficulties showing up in our life, but it means that we are functioning in a way that we can move through them with ease and grace. And they may still challenge us, but we can do it in this loving, compassionate, whole way from our whole self. I think I've given you a whole lot to think about this month, and I know this has been longer than some of my normal videos this month. I hope you guys have an amazing April and an amazing month, and just think about harmonizing. Think about that piece that really brings you forward to live vertical in the horizontal world, because living vertical in a horizontal world, that's where the magic happens. And that's where we can find the beauty in the beast, as they say. And that's a big key for me this month. I'm holding on to that. That's in this month's codes. And I'm going to keep finding the beauty in the beast, so I hope you will too. Take care, everybody. Remember, hey, if you don't have a copy of the Code Journey, pick it up. It's a fantastic journey. And it's not just a journey of what's happening in the outer world. It's a personal journey. And it doesn't matter where you are in your journey. It's going to be a powerful experience for you year after year after year. Take care. See you later.